Down in Florida, there's a marine mammal called a manatee, and they are these sweet, gentle creatures. And I intended this episode to be on this tragedy unfolding involving the manatee, which is in 2021, thousands of these sweet animals started starving to death. Researching that episode, what was the cause behind it, led me to a press release from a group called the Center for Biological Diversity. And the headline from this release from them says, "Study finds glyphosate in more than half of all sampled Florida manatees." Now, there's a couple of reasons why the manatees are dying, but this was one of the reasons. Their bodies were found with glyphosate in them. And now keep in mind, thousands have died. So I said there's no way I can do a story on the manatees without first learning what glyphosate is. In the process of trying to figure out what glyphosate is, all roads led to Carey Gillam. She's a journalist and an author. And I'm very fortunate I have Carey Gillam with me here on the phone. Carey, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for having
awesome.
me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. You wrote 2 books, which are gaining a lot of notoriety. One, Whitewash, that you wrote in 2017, and then the more recent one, Monsanto Papers, correct?
Right. The newest one just came out in March of this year. I've been a journalist for a really long time, and about 30 years now, and that included these novel genetically engineered crops that Monsanto rolled out in the 90s and how these crops were impacting farming practices and the chemicals that were used in conjunction with industrial farming, including glyphosate, which Monsanto patented in 1974 and introduced to the world really as Roundup, although it appears in hundreds of other brands. Glyphosate, which became the world's largest, most widely sold weed killer, there was a lot of evidence of environmental and human health impacts and problems associated with that. And in 2015, a publisher came to me and said, "You're writing a lot about this chemical glyphosate. I think you should write a book about it." And I said, "Gosh, no one wants to read a book about a pesticide." Put that on the back burner for a year or two. And then the International Agency for Research on Cancer declared it to be a probable human carcinogen, and all sorts of lawsuits started being filed. There was a lot of attention drawn to this. And so I wrote my first book, and it did win the Rachel Carson Book Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists. And the first book, Whitewash, is really a very sort of scientific academic book, and it looks at an in-depth study and analysis of Monsanto's history with this chemical, how it pushed this to international prominence to be so ubiquitous now in use that our government researchers have documented it in our food, in our bodies, even in water, and even in rainfall and air samples. It is literally inescapable in our world today, this chemical that has been tied to cancer. So the first book really is all about that, and using freedom of information, investigative tools to get government documents, regulatory documents. I was able to lay out how Monsanto had hidden the risks and acted in deceptive ways. Was further laid out when these court cases went to trial and internal Monsanto documents came out, again, underscoring how the company had deceived regulators and lawmakers and the public about the harm of its product. And then the Monsanto Papers is a very different book, the one that just came out. It's about the court cases. It follows the very first man to go to trial against Monsanto, to take them to court, to try to hold them accountable. And it follows his case.
Lee Johnson.
Diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma after excessive exposure to glyphosate, dying of a very horrible form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Very painful. Young guy in his 40s, 2 little kids. Takes you into his struggle against cancer and then his struggle to hold Monsanto accountable and it's sort of a legal drama, a much more probably readable book
Right.
for the general audience than Whitewash.
With enough money, could a company endanger the public and get away with it for decades? And I think the answer is yes.
Perfect. Yeah, Rachel Carson wrote different books. She wrote extensively on the environment. She was a very intelligent, well-known, well-respected biologist. She died, unfortunately, of cancer in 1964, but her book, Silent Spring, which examined the impacts of the indiscriminate use of pesticides on the natural world, specifically looking at the decline in bird population, but also other important, pollinators and insects and how they were being impacted by our sort of ignorant and indiscriminate use of pesticides. And that book, Silent Spring, spurred or is credited with spurring our modern environmental movement and the formation of a lot of different groups to try to work on protecting the environment and the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency as well. So her work was incredibly influential. And my book, Whitewash, I give a nod to her, I quote her, and several scientists do believe and have said, and are quoted in my book, that glyphosate, is indeed can be seen as the DDT, that we have now.
And they keep increasing the amounts that they're putting on the land every year. I think Rachel Carson also said call them biocides because they kill life, essentially. Rachel Carson, she wrote that book in 1962, and Monsanto went after her, and Monsanto is still basically responsible 60 years later.
I mean, it does seem like, and I make this point in my book and when I talk to people like this, that it seems like maybe we've forgotten the lessons of Rachel Carson's work. There are certainly very active and invested environmental groups out there working to protect us and working to raise awareness, like the work you're doing here, sharing information, sharing research and science. You have very powerful forces working against that. When you have great wealth and great power in these corporate interests, it is very hard to get government actors, regulators, and lawmakers to move to protect the public when they are, funded by, often and closely aligned with these special interests.
I did see some footage where I guess you were speaking to the European Parliament, right?
Yeah, so this was in 2017, and it was in October, which actually was the month my book was released, Whitewash.
Mm-hmm.
The European Parliament was looking at the license of glyphosate to renew it or not renew it in Europe, for use in Europe. And, there were great concerns. They were aware of my book and my work and my research. And so I was one of 7 experts. I put that in quotes. I don't know that I consider myself an expert, but they invited 6 scientists and myself to come and testify in Brussels to the European Parliament to give them they tried to sort of divide it up, people pro glyphosate, I guess you would say, or anti-glyphosate, that sort of thing. I was sort of in the middle, neither pro nor I didn't take a position on banning it or not banning it. I just wanted to share my research. The person who was supposed to be sitting next to me to give information, they invited the chairman of Monsanto, Hugh Grant. He declined, and they declined to send anyone from Monsanto at all to testify to the European Parliament, which made the Parliament members extraordinarily angry. You should be willing to speak to us. And so a man named David Kirkland, who was a scientist, showed up to speak. He declared himself to be independent of Monsanto, an independent voice. I included in my slideshow to the Parliament some information about the contract that he had with Monsanto to be paid as a consultant to Monsanto. He was one of many scientists around the world that Monsanto has been paying secretly, without really disclosing that, to have these scientists proclaim the safety of glyphosate.
Mainstream media, whatever that means, is afraid to really go after corporations because of corporate interests and that they have pressure in the newsrooms. Did anyone ever tell you, we really can't, don't go after them? So
yes, I was there. I joined Reuters in 1998 to cover agriculture and Monsanto. I spent many years doing this. Monsanto pushed back a lot. It is common. Companies, especially, the more powerful and wealthy, they are very strategic and very savvy in how to deal with very big media outlets such as Reuters. So it's quite common if you're doing stories that don't necessarily reflect their best look, right? Or their agenda, or threaten them in any way, or criticize them in any way. They're going to push back. They're going to go to your editors. They're going to complain. They're going to ask for corrections or changes. And if you make mistakes, you have to be fair and as balanced as possible and represent all legitimate facts, to your readers. So it's part of the business that they would push back, and they did really, really harder than any other company I'd ever dealt with. And I cover the banking industry and the healthcare industry as well. But I just had really good, strong editors for the first 12, 13, 14 years who said, if there's anything wrong with the story, let us know. But otherwise, this is good journalism and see you around, Monsanto. I got a brand new editor in late 2013 who had really done this big time business before. And he did not like the pressure from Monsanto, and they leaned on him really hard. And he told me in 2014, right before the International Agency for Research on Cancer declared it to be a probable human carcinogen, that I was not allowed to write about any scientific research on glyphosate ever again, and that I should. My editor by the name of David Greising, he's no longer with Reuters, no longer allowed to write about any scientific research, and that I should find something else to write about. I remember him telling me, no one cares about glyphosate. It's not a story. I often wonder now that it's exploded into this, global litigation, 100,000 plaintiffs, Monsanto's owner paying $15 billion in settle, if he reflects back on that conversation but to answer your question, yes, I mean, it is arguably part of the business to expect that corporations are going to do their utmost to sway journalists and to control what's written about them. But if you have good journalists and good editors, and you follow the facts, you're fine. So
why do you have to go to The Intercept or The Guardian to read about Monsanto, but not the Today Show or any of these mainstream shows or mainstream outlets?
Yes, there's been so much pressure. I mean, I've had, CBS, 60 Minutes, lots of different news outlets have reached out to me over the years, reporters will reach out, but then they'll get pushback from editors. And it's a dicey game. And it really takes a lot to get some news outlets to fight back or stand up to that kind of pressure. And again, it's not just, Monsanto is a very good example. I sort of describe Monsanto as the poster child for this much bigger issue. You see it with Pfizer right now, with the pharmaceuticals. Talk to reporters who say, gosh, if they're writing a story that doesn't follow the exact narrative that the pharmaceutical industry wants to see on vaccines right now, they get shut down.
You also had talked about the Environmental Protection Agency. They are charged with protecting the environment, but they don't really do that.
Yeah, what I'll say about the EPA is I know people inside the EPA. I've talked to scientists there. There are a lot of really good people there, I think, who work really hard to try to do that, to do their job.
They're supposed to be looking out for the environment. However, it is Monsanto and the chemical companies who are telling the FDA, for instance, what the levels should be.
Yes, in terms of just the EPA specifically, I've written extensively about the EPA for some textbooks and other books as well, and other people have. But the EPA sadly has become so politicized and so corrupted, and it is not related to who's in office and which party is in control and who's appointing. It's become systemic, endemic to the agency. And the scientists who are working in there trying to do their best job to protect the public have been pushing back against this since its formation virtually. And it's been documented over and over, whistleblower lawsuits and different administrations. The Obama administration acknowledged it, the Trump administration. People have been trying to fix this for years, but it isn't getting fixed. And this past summer, 4 scientists from the EPA actually came out as whistleblowers, put their names out there, brought audio recordings and emails as evidence of the corruption, where their managers within the EPA were actually telling them to alter their research and change it to hide the cancer risks of certain chemicals. And they sadly brought forward evidence of things that occurred during the Trump administration and during the Biden administration, the early months of the Biden administration. So again, it's really a nonpartisan problem. The EPA is essentially looking to the chemical industry to determine what levels of these chemicals are safe for us to take into our bodies in food and water and different exposures. And, you can argue, I guess, both sides why that is, but certainly it doesn't seem like the best system to be relying on the companies. And the other thing is we rely on the company research. Our regulators, when the companies want to bring a chemical to market, they do the research, fund the research, hand it over to the EPA. The EPA does not do original research in determining what can be allowed on the market.
The corporate world can tell government what they want, and government, there's like, okay, whatever you want, you can have it. People end up paying with their lives, just with the, I guess, the manipulation of regulators or, regulatory agencies.
Right. Yeah. Again, I mean, it does. We need really a whole system change in Washington in terms of how politics and corporate influence works with our laws and with our regulations. And so it's a bigger problem. And it's unfortunate. And my new book, The Monsanto Papers, really delves into that issue about we shouldn't have to rely on lawyers and mass tort litigation and our court system to hold companies accountable when their products injure people or kill people.
Mm-hmm.
But in this highly imperfect system that we have created and allowed to persist, the court system really is the only way now that individuals have to hold companies accountable and to create enough pressure on these companies that they will change their products or change their ways. And, Monsanto, their corporate owner, is now Bayer AG, the big pharmaceutical company. We shouldn't rely on lawyers. It should have been the regulator's job to.
Right. But, like local government, like fish and wildlife agencies, they're spraying that stuff all over the place. So that's probably going to continue.
Exactly.
I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
the manatees will continue to have ever higher levels of glyphosate in their system.